I Okay. So I'm now shuffling the cards, and then when you feel the time is right, you can tell me to stop, and I will take the top card.
Okay, stop.
Okay. So the card that's come up for you this afternoon is every day is another chance.
Mm, yes. Well, every day is, we could choose to go the patterns we've been in for the day before, or every day is another chance to break a pattern, to create a new pattern, to shift something. And so I look at, when I hear that card, that's how I relate to it, that you have a chance to break a pattern and create a new way of being, or create a new approach, or create a new way of seeing something. We could at any given moment sort of stop the old script. And in improv, there's a game called New Choice, and
Ah,
you'll be acting, and somebody will yell out, your character is saying something, and someone says New Choice, and then immediately you pivot, and you character makes a new choice, and then you act more, and then new choice. So every day is kind of a new choice. We
mm,
could continue on. We get to choose what we want to continue on with, or we get to choose what pattern we want to break, or and what we want to put in its place, or what new pattern we want to start creating. Or we have a choice to look at something differently, hear something differently, think about something differently. These are all things we do have agency on.
yes, you're absolutely right. And I am fascinated by your improvisational work because I think role play has a huge impact on the way that we see choice and how we can change our perspective in things. How did you get into improvisation?
Well, I used to be terrified of public speaking. Improv truly changed my life. I was terrified. And I was doing Toastmasters. This was at the very early days in my business, and I was doing Toastmasters, and it was helping a lot. But then when I started taking improv, so the way I got into improv was, I used to watch Whose Line Is It Anyway, the old British version, actually.
I
You
love
remember
that
that?
program.
Yeah. I love the British version. And I just thought nothing could look more fun. I did like theater and creative. My friends and I would be really creative. And at the time, I didn't even know we were doing some improv games with each other, but I didn't even know about improv. And then I'd see, and I thought that looked so fun. And when I started my business, I happened to get called by someone as potentially for me to support their company, by somebody who was running a improv group that did comedy sports. So I went out there, and when I was talking to him, I just thought, oh, I need to sign up. So I signed up for the comedy sports. While I was taking that class, there was a woman in there who said, you might like this other class. They do full length improv plays. At the time, it was called Star Theater. Now it's called Precipice Theater. And this was in the DC area. So I joined that, and I just fell in love with it. And then I started noticing at the end of my improv class, I felt so different that I thought, oh, now I could speak in front of a group. Now I could facilitate. Now I could. So improv freed me, freed my voice.
Mm,
So it really shifted how I do my work. And then I
wow.
found it so powerful that I started weaving it into my creativity, other creativity work I was doing in organizations, thinking I was the only one to discover this. And then found out a few years later that there was a whole applied improv network that had emerged. Other people were tuning into the power of improv too. At the time, there were 75 people there. And now I think there's 11,000 or something like that. And so many people doing it that are not even part of that. So
Mm,
it's really hit the scene. Yeah.
it's incredible. And obviously, in the moment of improvising, it's the unknown. And so to me, I'm hearing like the more you practice those skills of being in the unknown, of trusting the process, that then spills out into how you deal with uncertainty in your life because life happens, we many people have experienced things. And when you tap into your creativity in through that channel of improvisation, it kind of gives you more agency, as you were saying, and empowerment and confidence to
Mhm.
approach life in a very different way, doesn't it?
100%, 100%. I feel that I believe improv classes should be mandatory all through school and even offered in college because it teaches you a different way of being. Your relationship to life's challenges. Like we can consciously break our patterns or life will break our patterns for us. And they're not always fun. And sometimes they're devastating and heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. But your capacity to be more resilient and bounce back, improv really helps. It also helps in creativity. People are terrified of the unknown. They're terrified of making mistakes. They're terrified of being wrong and they're terrified of failure. When you start taking improv classes, you're going to be face to face in a safe, very safe environment with all of those things. You will constantly start making mistakes. Things won't work out. You'll do it, but you'll be doing it in a safe space. So you learn the muscle of trying something and not working out and no evaluation, just move on to what's next. Not the terrible self-talk that people can get into or the freeze in the face of the unknown. It's truly the improv principles and the rules of engagement which take us back to more how nature creates. I actually believe improv mirrors more how we're naturally designed to create. Yes, and build on things, be generative, make everyone else look good, serve the good of the whole. How we're naturally designed to co-create. If you look at kids, they do that. They're always adding on and making things out of nothing. And then we get trained, socialized, traumatized, educated out of our natural improv selves. So for me, improv is actually going back to our organic nature. So we do have nature on our side, but we have to unlearn and relearn. And it does help you feel much more less attached to having everything have to work out perfectly and being able to navigate like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try something else, becoming more of a discoverer.
Yeah. Um, Now, it is at this point that I will tell you that I absolutely hear and feel what you're saying because I'm a drama teacher
Mm.
and I work
Oh,
I work with secondary trained drama and performing arts specialists, but I'm now working primary and I'm going back into secondary in September. So when I reached out to you and I saw that you worked in this way and you had an appreciation for it, I thought, I know that you and I are going to absolutely connect because I hear what you're saying. And so much of what we do in the classroom has informed what I'm doing now with the podcast.
how would you say it was?
The working in primary now, I've definitely been able to tap into the playfulness that
Yeah.
children have. And I lost that. I
Mhm.
lost it because of things that had happened in a very short space of time. And I'm so grateful because I teach 3 and 4 year olds up to 11-year-olds at the moment. And it's interesting to see how they lose their playfulness even in that short space of time in the primary school. And then when you look at how, as you were saying, they're nurtured out of that playfulness, that instinctive nature as they get into key stage 3. So like 12, 13, 14, and then it all becomes everyone's looking at me. It's not about co-creation. It's about what I'm doing and getting that validation from other people. And then how that then kind of creates the pattern for going into work and how they show up at work and how they show up in their relationships and how they show up in their with their peers. So yeah, I'm I'm so excited to talk more about this on the podcast because you're doing it. Can you just briefly talk to me about that aliveness? Because, when you're in that moment, when you're improvising, the energy is so very real, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a way larger, multi-dimensional thing, but I'll just narrow down, and it's not just improv theater, it's any kind of I bring all kinds of whole brain creativity, so visual thinking and movement and embodiment. But anything, like, think about that, and the reason kids have so much energy, they have that natural life force energy and they haven't squelched it yet. And it hasn't been socialized out of them, or it hasn't, as children, it's not uncool to,
Yeah.
climb and move and jump and play. And like I love what you mentioned, the playfulness is such a significant part. And so we do have a natural animating life force energy within us. It's the same life force energy, like that'll have a flower bloom, that'll have things create that. And as kids, it's just running free. And then we suddenly, get a little bit out of it. So when we start engaging improv, it's a great way to do it. Um, Movement, any kind of improv, improv dance, improv movement, improv theater, as well as just any kind of movement or any kind of creative expression, you start to reconnect with that life force energy, that aliveness, and that energy is life generating more life. It's generative by its nature, and it's joyful. It tends to be very joyful. Sometimes when people are pain in deep pain and they start doing creativity, they may not be in touch with the joy right away, but they'll start moving energy. And, maybe the grief will show up or the anger or the fear, but, and that moves through. So that energy allows us to move through rather than keep stuck and, stagnant energy. To create
Sorry.
improv and creativity allows us to move energy. And when you start moving energy, you feel more alive, you act more alive, and your choices, your consciousness tends to go back to its natural way of thinking, how do I life generate more life? You have more life-giving ideas. You have more aliveness centered ways of seeing the world. So it's a mindset, a heart set change, a that looks at, and so organizations, which a lot of them were based on the machine model, the machine kind of model, organizations, and you suddenly, from an aliveness perspective, then your question is, how can we create conditions for each person to feel more alive, for this team to feel more alive and co-creative? How do we set systems in place that are more life-giving and generative and aliveness centered versus more mechanistic?
The systems and the environment that we potentially see are fear-based, aren't they? People are
Yeah, oh, yeah,
scared.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is gonna squash any sort of creativity because there's judgment there, there's restrictions, it's oppressive, and so what I'm hearing there is that you're actually trying to reshape those, reform those systems, those conditions to allow people to flourish. I do think that we need to look at the educational systems because
Mm,
they're we're kind of forcing children to continue down a certain path and in a certain way. And only when we look at those educational systems will we see sort of societal shifts, I think,
yeah,
on a grand.
it certainly would start there, right? In education systems. And, when we start to remodel to be more human-centered and more creative-centered and aliveness-centered, like we're naturally designed to be, our structures can then be put in place that allows more of that. Versus, it depends, like, what your value is, and so
Yeah,
when you're in an efficiency model or a model that's more mechanical, it w you'll structure differently than if human flourishing, human well-being, creativity, and aliveness were at the center. And the irony is oftentimes, I think less so now, but certainly when I was growing up, people would think of creativity as that thing you put on the side. You do that, do the real work, and then do your creative things on the side. Whereas every piece of research out there that people have studied, You activate more of your brain when you're literally more of your brain lights up as an engaged, and you create new neural pathways when you're being more creative, and you come more alive and you generate better ideas that don't have to be redone as much. And there's truly no research anywhere that shows how bringing more creativity into your organizations or education systems reduces that. Like, there's no research that backs up the way systems a lot of systems predominantly were created. I think there are some education systems that are changing it, but they're not as mainstream. And same, there are a lot, certain organizations are very creativity centered, but still in the large scale, they using antiquated structures and then wanting people to be creative and innovative. And they're not setting the conditions for that.
You see, all of that juiciness came from that one card.
I know, I love it. Great. Yeah, it's beautiful.
No, that was really good.